Did you ever think a creature born of legend could heal a human heart? That something the world calls a monster could feel sorrow, offer comfort, and teach us what it means to forgive. In the forgotten valleys of Idaho, a 16-year-old girl named Marae once placed her hand on the chest of a young Bigfoot, scared, wounded, and trembling, and heard a sound so deep, so human, it changed everything. This isn't a fantasy. It's a story of connection, of trust, and of a silent bond between species who were never meant to understand each other. Until they did. His name was Briar. He came from the forest, not to harm, but to remember. And when the world turned against him, one girl stood still. You're about to hear the story of how fear became faith, how a creature once hunted became family, and how a single moment of kindness echoed through an entire town. So tell me, where are you watching this from? How far can a story like this travel? From a quiet barn in Idaho, all the way to your heart. From our forest to your home, we send you our warmest hello. By late spring, the valley still breathed like a creature freshly woken. Wet earth, warming grass, the hush of runoff seeping through old rocks. Meadow Creek curved quiet through the pasture, muddy but mild, no longer angry like it had been during the last storms. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, but the sod beneath Marae Whitlow's boots still held onto it, soft and giving, leaving damp prints behind her as she followed the narrow path through the willow brush. She moved with a kind of silence that wasn't shyness but memory, like she'd learned too early, that the world only listened when you didn't try too hard. The air smelled of soaked cedar and something musky and green. Ahead, the trail curved out of sight behind a jut of boulders and long grass. Somewhere beyond that was the old mare, her mama's horse. That was the reason she'd slipped out with the fence gate barely clinking, why her breath still fogged in the chill air even as the sun began to press down through the mist above. The creek murmured to her left, tucked in beside wild mint and long grasses. Marae stepped across a log she'd crossed 100 times, but this time something stopped her. A sound. Not a bird, not a coyote. Lower, thicker, a kind of tremor more than a tone. She froze. Someone was there. She crouched slowly, hand instinctively pressing to her thigh where her jeans were damp. Her eyes narrowed, and then she saw it. Just beyond the bend, near the edge of the water, tangled in rusted barbed wire like a forgotten trap, was a figure hunched low, tall but crumpled, covered in dark fur matted with wet grass and burrs. About 5 feet tall, maybe more, arms longer than hers, elbows bent strangely as if trying not to struggle. Its back rose and fell in shallow panic. It turned, and that face, not an animal's, not fully. It had skin, pale beneath streaks of dark mud and thorn scratches. The eyes caught the light, amber, like her father's hunting dog used to have when it crouched in the barn, scared of thunder. Its face held no snarl, no teeth bared. Just fear, and something else, deeper and sadder, like a child trying not to cry. Marae stumbled back a step, heart leaping. The instinct to run burned through her knees. But then her mother's voice came, not loud, not a command, just the kind that stayed after a person was gone. If you see something hurting, don't look away. The old barbed wire had been strung around some posts decades ago. One of the loops had snagged tight around the creature's ankle. Another pressed into its forearm. It hadn't thrashed. It hadn't called out. It had waited. Marae looked down at her hand. She hadn't even realized she was still carrying the rusted pair of fence pliers she'd meant to use on a loose post. Her throat was tight as she stepped forward, slow and careful, her boots sinking in. "I'm not gonna," she whispered, not knowing how to finish. The creature didn't move, but its breath hitched, its chest shuddered. She dropped to one knee, close enough now to smell it. Damp fur, earth, something like wild mint and sap. Her hand shook as she reached forward, pliers gripped tight. finding the first twisted strand of rusted wire. The creature flinched. She froze. Then it made a sound. Low, deep. A note, not quite a hum, not quite a growl. It didn't vibrate in the air so much as in her ribs. Her heart slowed. Somehow, her hand steadied. She found the tension knot where the wire cinched tight and began to work the cutters into place. One snip, another. She whispered without meaning to. Words that didn't matter, just sound. The way you'd talk to a frightened colt in the dark. The creature made the sound again, lower this time, rounder. Not a cry, not a warning. Something like comfort. Her hand bled a little from a barb she didn't feel. The final wire snapped back as it released. The creature stilled, and from the shadowed line between the trees, something moved. She didn't hear it before she saw it. Tall. Taller than any man she'd ever known. A silhouette against the trunks. Broad shoulders, long arms, covered in fur darker than the shade around him. Still. Utterly still. It stepped forward once, enough for the light to touch its face, and it wasn't a monster. The face was ancient but gentle. Human-like, wild, not cruel. Eyes amber like the smaller one, skin pale beneath the thin fur of the cheeks and jaw, a short beard blending into it. It held one hand over its own chest, then bowed its head. Not low, not weak, but respectful. Then, just as silently, it stepped back into the woods and vanished. Marae turned. The smaller one was watching her. Chest rising and falling, eyes wide. She didn't know what made her do it, but she reached out, just a little, and when her fingers touched the fur of its hand, it lifted its arm slowly and placed its palm to its own chest, held it there. That was when she whispered the name, Briar, because its fur held small tangles of old weed stems, little thorns like the briar patch behind the barn. When she stood, she expected it to run, but it didn't. It limped a little, one leg still stiff, but followed her. She didn't take it through the front. She led it around, past the woodpile, past the old goat pen, through the back gate near the barn, into the smaller shed her father once used for a sick calf. She laid down blankets, dry hay, tucked it in quiet as if it were her baby brother. But she didn't have one. Just the memory of holding her mama's hands the day before she went in for surgery and didn't come back. That night, the rain returned, tapping on the tin roof in gentle rhythm. From the kitchen, Hank Whitlow stood by the stove, hands hovering near the coffee pot. He'd heard it, not the roof. Something else, a sound, deep and strange, coming from the shed. He turned toward the wall. On the nail above the door hung the old shotgun. He stared at it. His hand lifted halfway, paused, then slowly lowered. He stepped back from the wall. In the shed, Marae sat with her knees pulled up. Briar lay in the hay, eyes half closed, still shivering. She'd brought the thermometer from the medicine drawer. He had a fever. She didn't know how much. When her hand brushed his forehead, he stirred. Not to pull away, just to hum. A low, broken murmur. She didn't know why, but she breathed with it, matched it. Her lungs moved in time with the sound. The fear in her chest loosened. She stayed that way until her eyes dropped shut. Later, Hank stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, watching the night through the rain-streaked window. He hadn't touched the gun, and he didn't know why. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the sound. Maybe it was the way the girl hadn't cried out, hadn't come running. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the memory of flames and the boy he hadn't been fast enough to pull out. The barn creaked in the wind. The fence line held. And from the shed came one last tremor of sound, soft as a sigh, curling into the bones of the house like something that had always been there, just waiting for someone to listen. The girl mumbled in her sleep. The creature rested, and the man stood still. Somewhere out in the trees, past the edge of the Whitlow land, a tall shape waited in silence. Its breath fogged in the air like smoke, its hand still over its heart, and it did not leave, not yet, not until it was sure, not until the girl had closed the door, not until the first act of mercy had been made. Only then did it fade into the dark, the hush of the pines closing around it. The memory of what had just begun sinking into the soil. A beginning shaped like fear, a name whispered in the damp, and a girl who did not look away. The air had turned dry, but not warm. Early summer in Passamaroy Valley never did come all at once. The sun beat down with that white, hollow heat that baked the barn roof and curled the edges of last year's hay, but the wind still carried something sharp from the mountains, something that stung a little when it slipped under the collar. The shed smelled of iodine and dry straw now, not rain and soil like it had the night Briar arrived. Outside, the hills buzzed with flies. Inside, the stillness held like breath caught in the chest. Dr. Etta Voss moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades earning the right not to be questioned. Her hands, old and lined, didn't shake as they guided the cloth over Briar's shoulder, dabbing gently at the scratches left by the barbed wire. Her fingers pressed with just enough pressure to test the skin, not enough to startle. She didn't ask what the thing was. Not yet. She didn't flinch either. Marae stood beside her, eyes focused, holding the bottle of disinfectant, even though her fingers had long gone numb from clenching. She hadn't slept much. Maybe 2 hours, curled against the stall wall on a saddle blanket. She didn't remember dozing off, just waking up to Briar breathing softly, curled like a foal, that face half in shadow but still watching her. The creature hadn't tried to leave. It hadn't spoken. But when Marae had come close again in the morning, it had raised its hand and pressed its palm to its chest. The same gesture, the same rhythm. She'd done it back without thinking. Hank stood just outside the stall, leaned on the post like a man trying not to see what was right in front of him. His face set, his jaw hard, arms folded across his chest. When Voss had pulled up in the old green pickup, he didn't wave her off. Didn't welcome her either. Just nodded once and said, "You're not gonna like what you see," then turned and walked back toward the shed without another word. Now he stood watching, not entering, not stopping it, just watching. "I need more light," Voss muttered without looking up. "Pull the door wider." Marae obeyed. The morning sun angled in, throwing a slant of gold across the straw-strewn floor. Dust swirled in it. Caught in the beam, Briar's fur looked less like fur and more like hair left out too long in the sun, dark with strands of auburn, a few snagged with thistle. A low vibration trembled in its chest when the antiseptic touched the wound. Not pain, not protest, just sound, humming low and even. "He does that," Marae said softly. "When I'm scared, or when something hurts." Dr. Voss paused, tilted her head slightly, just enough to suggest she was listening not to the words, but the spaces between them. Her face, normally fixed in a kind of neutral determination, shifted. Just a little. She finished cleaning, then wrapped the shoulder with gauze. Briar didn't resist. Its gaze stayed fixed on Marae the entire time, not flinching, not breaking contact. "You named it?" Voss asked after a while, her tone unreadable. "Briar," Marae said. "Because of—" She gestured at the tangles in his coat. Voss nodded once, then reached up to wipe her hands on the cloth she'd slung over her shoulder. "He's not infected. Fever's mild. Skin's intact under the scratches." She stood slowly. "Not an animal," Hank snorted. "Not human either." "No," Voss said. "But not dangerous, not to her." Her eyes found his. "Not yet." He stepped forward once. "Yet?" "It was tangled in barbed wire and didn't lash out," Voss said evenly. "That tells me something." "What it tells me," Hank muttered, "is that we just brought trouble into this house." "Maybe," Voss replied. "But you've brought worse in before." Her eyes narrowed. "Not cruel, but cutting. Or do you not remember that kid from Butte you dragged out of the fire line in '84? Hank didn't answer. His jaw worked, then went still. Briar shifted. The hum in its chest deepened, trembled the air like a low cello string. Marae looked down, Her hand was shaking again. Briar raised its palm, touched its own chest once more, then locked eyes with her. The sound dropped lower. Her breath steadied. Voss watched, her face unreadable again. After a moment she murmured, "The old folks used to talk about songs in the woods. Sounds like wind, but not wind. Said it could quiet horses, even hearts." She shook her head. "I never believed them." "But you do now," Marae said quietly. Voss didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. That afternoon, after Voss left, Marae cleaned the shed again. She replaced the old hay, brought fresh water, swept the dirt floor clean of any blood or straw soaked through. She didn't ask Hank for help. He didn't offer, but he didn't stop her either. Later, standing in the kitchen with his back to the window, Hank spoke without turning around. "You think you're saving it?" Marae looked up from the sink where she was washing out a bowl. "I don't think," she said. "I know. You don't know what it is. I know it didn't hurt me. I know it could have." He turned, eyes dark. "That ain't enough. It's more than I get from most people." He didn't answer that. The next day, Agnes Bellamy showed up without warning. She came bearing a loaf of molasses bread wrapped in a towel and a story about her mare calming down once when something deep in the trees made a sound she couldn't place. "Like a foghorn, but soft," she said, "like it was under the ground." She said it as though she didn't quite believe it herself, but needed to speak it anyway. Hank didn't react much, but he didn't ask her to leave. He sat on the porch steps while she talked, staring out toward the shed with that same unreadable look. "I remember when the horses were all spooked during that storm 2 years ago," Agnes added. "Thought it was coyotes, but they weren't acting right. Wasn't fear, was confusion." She looked over her shoulder toward the barn. Then it went quiet. Not because they got tired, because something calmed them. Hank didn't respond, but his shoulders softened just a hair. That evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the fields a dull gold, Hank stood again at the edge of the shed. The light flickered across the frame, casting shadows on the floor. Briar was resting, breathing slow, one arm curled under his head. Marae sat beside him, cross-legged, sketching on the back of an old feed bag with a charcoal stub. She didn't look up when her father stepped closer. She didn't have to. Briar stirred. The air held. The shotgun was still hanging on its hook. Hank's hand rose, hovered, then dropped. He let out a long, tired breath. "All right," he said, "for now." He didn't expect a thank you. None came. That night, the wind blew warmer, stirring the dry rafter beams. Somewhere out near the pasture line, an owl called once. Then silence again. In the dark, Marae stayed close to the shed wall, arms wrapped around her knees. Briar didn't speak, didn't sing, just breathed. And she matched it, breath for breath, until the rhythm made something inside her quiet. She didn't remember falling asleep. And Hank, in the house, sat up at the kitchen table with a coffee gone cold, listening, wondering if what he'd done was mercy or a mistake. But he didn't reach for the gun, and the wind kept blowing. But the fear, it didn't settle the same way, not this time. The day stretched longer now, and the sun didn't fall so fast behind the hills. But the heat came quick and stayed thick. Grass along the fence line turned pale. The creek bed near the shed narrowed to a thread of glinting water, shallow and sluggish under the weight of early July. Wind carried the scent of singed grass and crushed wildflowers, and somewhere deeper in the timberline, the birds had quieted down. Inside the stall, the light was slanted and golden. Briar sat on the floor with his legs tucked under him, back slightly curved, eyes following Marae's hands as she knelt across from him. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, shaping gestures that he'd seen before. She opened her palm, fingers spread. "Wait," she said softly, then made a fist over her chest. "Water." She tapped her own elbow and frowned a little. "Hurt?" Briar watched. then lifted his hand and mimicked the first one, almost exactly, only with the wrong rhythm. She smiled and corrected him gently. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't clumsy either. He caught on fast, sometimes faster than she expected. He didn't speak, not the way people did, but he learned her signs one by one. Come. Stop. Here. Then the harder ones. Safe. Sorry. Gone. She taught him slowly, letting the rhythm of their days set the pace. There wasn't much else she could give him. But language. Language was a kind of bridge. By the third week, he started leaving small things on the doorstep of the shed. A twisted bundle of long grass and willow thread. A flat stone covered in dried river silt with 3 lines scratched across it. One morning, a feather tucked inside a loop of vine, like a bracelet for no wrist. Marae didn't ask why. She just picked them up and placed them gently in the box beneath the window, like they meant something, like they were being saved. Dr. Voss came by again on a Thursday when the clouds hung high but refused to rain. She moved with more caution now. Not fear, just awareness. She carried a bucket of warm water and a bar of lye soap, muttering something about bugs in the summer heat and keeping skin clear. Her voice was clipped, but her eyes lingered longer on Briar's face. She didn't flinch anymore. He let her work, arms still, head bowed. Marae noticed the way his breath stayed calm even when she poured water over his back. There was trust there now, not just survival. When Voss rolled up the edge of fur near his shoulder, she froze. There, just beneath the skin, smooth and healed over, was a perfect round scar. Not ragged like wire, not torn like a fight. Smooth, circular, old, like a bullet. She didn't speak. Didn't draw attention to it. Just met Marae's eyes once, quiet and unreadable. Then gently rolled the fur back down. Her hands didn't pause after that, but her thoughts had shifted. Later outside, she wiped her palms on a rag and said in a low voice, "That wasn't from an animal." Marae nodded. "I know." Voss looked down the hill toward the trees, toward nothing. "You tell your daddy?" Marae didn't answer. The silence said enough. That evening, as the heat finally broke and shadows stretched long across the paddock, a truck rolled up the gravel road, dust trailing like a tail behind it. Cal Reddick climbed out, Deputy Starr catching the last of the sun. He tipped his cap as he stepped toward the porch. His presence was casual, but his boots moved with purpose. Hank met him by the railing, arms crossed. "Cal, just coming by," Cal said, nodding. "Checking in." His eyes flicked toward the shed. "Heard you might have got some new livestock." Hank didn't smile. "Something like that." Cal thumbed at the brim of his hat, squinting into the field. "You hear they're looking to expand the hunting trails? Talk is they're trying to bring in more out-of-staters. Elk season mostly, but they're clearing brush already, pushing deeper into the western ridge." Hank didn't respond right away. Then, "That's where I left the old traps." Cal's brow lifted slightly. "You didn't pull them?" "Figured they'd rust out on their own." Cal looked off toward the distant trees. "Maybe they didn't." The pause hung a little too long. "Guy from Boise went missing last week. They found him yesterday near Buckthorn Ridge. Mauled, no bear sign, no cat either." Marae, standing just inside the doorway, felt her stomach twist. She looked toward the shed, then back to the men. Her heartbeat picked up. Cal caught her glance. "You seen anything strange lately?" Hank didn't blink. "Everything's strange out here if you look long enough." That night, as the sun bled out behind the range, Marae sat with Briar near the shed door, both of them facing the darkening hills. She hadn't asked him about it. Not directly. But there was something different in his posture now. His hands were twitchier. His ears moved more often, like he was listening for something only he could hear. Then, just past the second fence line, she saw it. A shape, large, still, upright, not moving forward, just watching. North, The same one from the trees, from the first day. He stood like a statue, face unreadable in the distance. But Marae knew. He wasn't here to intrude. He was checking in. He raised a hand slowly, pressed it to his chest, and held it. Then lowered it, turned, vanished. That night, Marae couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the faint sounds from the stall. Briar hadn't made noise, but something pulled at her. She got up barefoot, wrapped in a flannel shirt, and padded down the hallway, past her father's room, through the kitchen, out the door. The night was cool, the grass dewy. She opened the stall door softly. Briar wasn't inside. Panic hit like a cold slap. She stepped back, scanning the field, heart racing. Then she saw movement, low to the ground, at the far side of the paddock. She ran, breath caught in her chest, and found him crouched near the fence, hands in the dirt. He looked up when she came near. No fear, but his hands were dirty. Something clutched in them. A piece of cloth, brown, torn. She looked closer. Part of a jacket, caked with mud and blood. And tangled in it, stuck in the hem, a single casing from a rifle round. A heavy one, big enough for a bear. Marae swallowed hard. Her legs felt shaky. Briar offered it to her, like it mattered, like she needed to see. She took it with trembling fingers, and then, slowly, he reached out. Not to reassure her, but to point to the trees, to where it had happened. She understood. He hadn't run from danger. He'd gone looking, and he'd brought back the proof. The next morning, Cal returned. He brought the evidence to a friend in the ranger service. Quiet, off the record, no one wanted panic. But something shifted in the way he looked at Briar after that. He came to the stall, asked to see him. And when Briar stepped forward, not timid, not bold, but honest, Cal froze. For the first time, he really looked. Not at the fur, not at the size, at the eyes. Amber, steady, holding something he hadn't expected to find. Cal lowered his voice. "He didn't kill that man, did he?" Marae said nothing, just placed her hand over her chest. Briar stepped forward, did the same, and Cal nodded. Just once. Then we keep this quiet. That night, as crickets hummed and the wind softened through the cottonwoods, Marae showed Briar a piece of charcoal from the wood stove. She laid down a strip of board, guided his hand, drew a simple curve, like the bend of the creek near the meadow. He copied it, hesitant, then with more confidence. It wasn't perfect, a little crooked, a little wild. But when he looked at her, he pointed at the mark, then pointed toward the field. She smiled. "Yeah," she said, "that's it." And he hummed, just once, soft and low. A promise not spoken. Not yet, but understood. The first leaves began to drift early that year. Little flashes of gold catching on the wind, skimming the water, clinging to damp boots in the morning. By mid-September, the edges of the pasture had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt watchful. The creek ran clearer now, stripped of summer silt, chilled from the mountains. It whispered through Meadow Creek like something half-forgotten, but not gone. Word reached the valley before the sheriff's truck ever did. Some hunter had been found off Buckthorn Ridge, body half-submerged near a root tangle, boot missing, eyes open. Locals didn't need the details to start filling in the blanks. That was how it worked out there. A shape in the fog, a scream no one could trace. It didn't matter that the man was out alone, that his permit had expired, that bear sign had been found farther down the slope. Once someone said the word, it stuck. Monster. Marae heard it from the hardware store first. A woman near the canning jars, whispering about claw marks and torn hide. Then again at the diner, where two ranchers argued about whether to bring out dogs. By the time Deputy Cal Reddick showed up at the Whitlow place again, the air around town had shifted. People were afraid, not curious, not cautious, afraid. Hank met him by the shed, arms folded, a tight line running through his jaw. "You checking your warning?" he asked. Cal didn't smile. Both. He looked tired. The kind of tired that settles in behind the eyes, quiet and hard. He glanced toward the barn, then back at Hank. "There's pressure," he said. "The man who died had family up in Haley. His brother's talking about lawsuits. They want answers. You get any?" Cal nodded, slowly. "We found a few prints. Big, deep, but not spread right for a creature that size. The stride's wrong. The claw angle's too sharp." "Not Briar," Hank said. "No," Cal said. "But folks aren't going to listen to that if it walks like a bear and leaves tracks like a legend." That night, Marae couldn't sit still. She tried reading, tried sketching on the old planks again, but her hands kept slipping. She felt it tightening around her, the circle of suspicion closing in. And Briar. Briar had been restless too. Not pacing, not afraid. Just distant, like he could feel the shift in the air before anyone said a word. By morning, he was gone. The stall door wasn't broken, no tracks, just missing. Panic cracked open inside her. Not loud, not sudden, slow, like a fault line waking up. She ran the fence line twice, called low under her breath even though she knew he didn't answer to sound. Then toward the tree line, knees catching on fallen branches, heart hammering in her throat. She found him returning. Just past the creek bed, near the edge of the stone bridge, he appeared, covered in mud, limbs trembling, not from fear but from effort. In his hands, a torn jacket sleeve, soaked and stiff with blood. Folded inside it, a bullet casing, slick with old dirt, edge bent, and something else. A strip of fabric with printed camo, the kind sold at surplus stores. Faded initials on the tag. MT. Marae stared. He hadn't fled. He'd gone looking. She took the bundle from him gently, eyes burning. When she looked back up, his face held nothing triumphant. Only weariness. His chest rose and fell, and slowly he raised one hand and placed it to his heart. He had brought back the truth. Later that day, in the stillness of the shed, she showed it to her father. Laid it out on the old workbench without saying a word. Hank stood there a long time. Then he whispered, "That's my trap." She looked at him, breath tight. "I left it years ago, up near the cut path where the old timberline used to run. I forgot it. No tags, no markings. Thought it'd rust out. But someone must have reset it, cleaned it up, might have even moved it." He picked up the casing with his bare hand, turned it in the light. "Baited it for bear," he said quietly. Or worse. Marae didn't speak. She didn't have to. The shape of guilt on her father's face said more than any apology. That evening, Cal returned. Hank handed him the items without explanation. Cal studied them in silence. When he saw the casing, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Memory. "I'll take it to a friend in Boise," he said. "Ballistics guy. Used to be forestry. If this matches the wrong weapon, maybe we shift the conversation." He paused, then asked. Not like a cop, just a man. "Did he say anything?" Marae stepped forward. She pressed her hand to her chest, then waited. Briar did the same. Cal watched, then nodded. For the first time, no further questions came. The next morning, light poured in soft across the stall floor. Marae brought out a fresh piece of board from behind the shed, cleaner, flatter. She laid it down, handed Briar the charcoal again. He looked at her for a moment, then reached out. Slower now. His fingers found the edge, drew a curve again, this time steadier, like a river bend. Then beside it, a crooked square, off angle, too small. She stared. It was the shed. She looked up, heart catching. "You're remembering," she whispered. Briar touched the square, then the curve, then back again. A bridge, a connection, a choice. She reached out slowly, touched the image with her fingertip. He didn't flinch, and then he made a sound. Low, not frightened, not soothing, but deep, steady, something between a hum and a breath held in tune. She let it carry into her, matched it. One beat, then another. Outside, the leaves turned in the wind. Inside, something ancient and quiet settled into place. Not safety. Not yet. But understanding. Later that night, as the world slowed again and the moon sat low over the ridgeline, Hank sat on the porch with his elbows on his knees, watching the shed light flicker. A long time passed. He didn't speak, didn't drink, just sat. Then slowly, almost without meaning to, he raised his hand to his chest and left it there. In the stall, Briar slept lightly, breath even, one hand resting beside the drawing, and from the trees, farther off than sound should carry, came a single, distant note. Not song, not warning, but a call, worn and weary, like someone calling their own name, hoping it still meant something. Marae lay awake long after, staring at the ceiling, hearing that sound echo through her ribs, and knowing the storm hadn't passed, only paused. The mornings turned sharp. Frost clung low on the meadow, just enough to make the barn roof sweat and the grass whisper when boots passed through. It was the kind of cold that didn't show itself with snow, not yet, but crept into lungs and turned breath tight, especially at night. The kind that left a thin silver on fence wire, like winter pressing one finger against the valley's shoulder. Marae felt it first in her chest, just a flicker, waking up shorter of breath, needing longer to walk to the far gate. She didn't say anything at first, didn't want to make it real. But the cough came next, dry and catching. Always worse in the mornings when the mist hung low. Inside the stall, Briar noticed before anyone else. Not through words, not through questions, just the way his gaze shifted every time she sat down too fast. The way his hum changed pitch when her hands trembled lighting the lamp. He moved closer now, not out of curiosity, but out of instinct. As if every tremor in her breath rewired something inside him. And on the nights the coughing kept her awake, he didn't sleep either. He'd sit curled at the edge of the hay, spine arched, that human-like wild man, face calm and alert. And when the shaking got bad, when her breath slipped too shallow, he would hum. Low, steady, deep in the chest, like a mountain under thunder. The sound didn't travel far, but it filled the stall, humming through the old pine boards and into her bones. Sometimes it worked. Not like medicine, like memory, like her breath remembered what rhythm was. And slowly, she'd come back. But they both knew it couldn't last forever. Dr. Voss arrived one Sunday morning after a stretch of silence. She parked farther down the road than usual, walking the last part on foot, coat tucked tight, boots damp from the creek crossing. Hank met her at the gate, his face drawn, his eyes not hiding much anymore. "How bad?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just glanced toward the stall, then toward the house. "You'll have to see for yourself." She found Marae sitting on the floor, wrapped in an old quilt, skin paler than it should have been. Her breath came shallow, but not panicked, just tired. "Been like this long?" Voss asked. Marae didn't lie. "A week, maybe more." The doctor knelt, touched her forehead, checked her lungs with 2 fingers and a stethoscope that still smelled like alcohol wipes and leather. She frowned. "You need real care," she said, eyes narrowing. "You need monitoring." "If I go," Marae said softly, "they'll take him." Voss didn't answer, but the silence said she agreed. That night the decision came in whispers, between father and daughter, between breath and restraint. They didn't say goodbye, just agreed on something heavier. Hank waited until just before dawn, the air still frozen stiff. He opened the stall gently, his shadow long across the floor. Marae stood, already dressed. She didn't cry, she didn't shake, but she moved slow, as if every step came from somewhere deeper than bone. Briar stood too. He didn't resist the rope looped loosely around his shoulders. Not tight, not binding. A signal more than a leash. The way you lead something not because it's wild, but because it respects you enough to let you. They walked without words up the slope behind the house, past the old fence posts and deer trails. where the grass bowed with frost. The valley opened below like a quiet, sleeping lung. At the ridgeline, Marae stopped. Briar paused beside her, breathing low. His eyes scanned the timberline, and then from the trees, still and vast, came north. He didn't charge, didn't call out, just stood like a wall the forest had grown. Marae felt Hank behind her, but didn't turn. Her hand went to Briar's shoulder, gently. He didn't move. North stepped forward, one pace, and waited. Briar looked up at her, eyes full of something old. Marae nodded. Briar stepped forward, stopped, turned back, ran. Before she could brace, he was in front of her again. Not touching, just reaching. In his hand, clutched tight, a piece of plank. The one he'd drawn on, the creek bend, the shed, the crooked square. He placed it in her hands, gently, like an offering. She held it like it might break. Her breath caught. The edges burned in the morning cold. Then he was gone again, walking back toward north. At the tree line, they stopped. Briar turned one last time, raised a hand, pressed it to his chest, and vanished. The forest swallowed them the way only forests can. No sound, no crackle, just the slow curtain of green and gray. Marae stared until her eyes ached. She clutched the plank to her chest like it might warm her. Behind her, Hank placed a hand on her shoulder. Rough, calloused, steady. She leaned into it, and when they walked back down, neither spoke. In the house, the silence followed. She placed the drawing by her bed. She didn't sleep that night, not fully, just breathed in pieces. Outside, the wind curled low over the pasture, and from the edge of the trees, far beyond where light reached, something sang. Not a song, but a sound, fractured and soft, like a warning half swallowed or a prayer left unfinished. And then silence again, the kind that waits, not ends. It came in the middle of a storm, not one of those storybook blizzards with clean snowfall and stillness. This one rolled in jagged and wet, wind screaming through the chimney like it had something personal to say, slamming the shutters until the latch snapped off the back window. The fields outside blurred with rain. Not snow, not yet, just cold enough to bite, wet enough to soak through the seams of your boots before you made it past the barn. Hank had boarded the shed door just that morning, sensing something mean in the air. By the time night fell, the sky was so dark it looked bruised. Thunder didn't rumble, it cracked. Marae couldn't sleep. She sat upright in bed, blanket tight around her chest, wheezing a little with every breath. The cough had passed mostly, but left a ghost behind, a rawness in her lungs. She pressed a hand to her ribs and counted to 4 with each inhale. She could still feel the rhythm when she closed her eyes, Briar's hum echoing beneath her own skin, like a steady old drumbeat buried in memory. The wind knocked something off the porch. A bucket, maybe. It scraped and rolled and was gone. And then, just after midnight, the stall door slammed open. Not from the wind. It was a different sound. Heavier, wet wood. A thud. Then silence. Marae threw the quilt aside before she knew what she was doing. She didn't yell for her father, didn't grab a flashlight. She just pulled on her boots and coat with hands that knew too much already. By the time she reached the back door, Hank was already halfway through the kitchen. His face was pale, drawn, eyes wide like he was waking up into something he'd always feared. He didn't ask, just stepped past her, bare arms goose-pimpled in the cold, and opened the door. The rain hit them sideways. Lantern light spilled out across the mud, and there he was, Briar, collapsed in the yard, just shy of the porch. Bigger now, at least a head taller than he'd been when he left, covered in thick fur, matted with dirt and sap, streaks of blood running down his shoulder and side. He was on his knees, one hand planted in the mud, the other gripping something tight to his chest. He raised his face toward Marae and made a sound, deep, cracked, more breath than voice. Her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. She ran. She dropped beside him, her arms sliding under his to lift, to brace. But he was too heavy, too far gone. His skin was hot beneath the fur, burning, his breath ragged. Then from the dark, another shape moved. Hank turned fast, his hand already reaching for the rifle, but stopped. North stood at the edge of the yard, soaked, silent, still. His massive frame filled the night like a piece of the mountain had stepped forward. He didn't approach, didn't raise a hand. He just looked at Briar, then at Marae. His amber eyes flicked once to Hank. Then he made the sound. A hum. Low. Too low for words. Just a vibration through the wet air. Not a cry for help. Not even a warning. It was a handoff. Then he stepped back and disappeared into the storm. Hank dropped the rifle. It didn't hit the ground. He caught it by the barrel and swung it back to hang on the hook inside the doorway. Then he turned to Marae. "We need the kit." She nodded, eyes already full but not blinking. They got Briar into the stall together, not lifting, just steadying, holding his weight as he staggered. He didn't fight, didn't cry out. He moved like someone trying to hold himself together until it was safe to fall apart. Voss arrived 15 minutes later, hair wet under her hood, face grim. She didn't ask why she'd been called. She just opened her bag. The stall smelled of blood and earth and wet fur. The rain hit the roof like gravel. Marae knelt by Briar's side while Voss cleaned the wound, long and torn, like something sharp had ripped sideways. Not a bullet, not a trap, a claw, something that had fought back. Hank held the lantern above them, hands steady, his eyes locked on the stitching. Voss worked fast, her mouth set in a hard line, only glancing up once when Briar made a sound, low and cracked, almost like that hum, but thinner, barely holding shape. "He won't die from this," she said quietly. "But he's going to need time, and warmth, and someone close." Marae placed her hand on his shoulder. His skin twitched under her touch, then calmed. She didn't speak, just matched her breath to his, slow. Even. The storm outside raged on, but the air inside the stall turned still. Later Cal showed up. The radio had picked up a signal from the ridge. Strange lights, movement near the old fire roads. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He stood in the stall doorway, boots dripping, hat in hand, watching Hank finish dressing the wound. The sight of the man who once nearly pulled the trigger now tucking a wool blanket over a bloodied Bigfoot wasn't something Cal could make sense of. But he didn't try. After a long pause, he stepped back. "I didn't see anything tonight," he said softly, and left. The air hung heavy even after he was gone. Hank didn't say much. But before he walked out, he turned to Briar, still fevered, still half-conscious, and did something he hadn't done before. He placed his hand gently on Briar's forehead, checking for heat, checking for breath, like a father might, and his hand didn't shake. Marae stayed up the rest of the night. She placed the drawing, the one Briar had given her, the curve of the creek and the crooked shed, beside the straw where he could see it when he woke. He didn't stir, but she knew he knew, and somewhere beyond the field, past the cedar line, something large moved through the trees. Not hunting, not running, just circling, waiting for morning, waiting for whatever would come next. The cold came harder in December, not the kind that whispered in the rafters or made the wind sing through fence gaps. This was the kind that bit, the kind that turned dirt roads to glass and knuckles raw and white, the kind that meant wood piles had to be doubled and breath turned to steam in the barn before the sun even rose. At the edge of Salmon, folks started wearing their second coats, the good ones, the ones with burn holes and stories stitched into the sleeves. And when someone said town hall meeting, they meant it. No one skipped those unless they were dying or drunk. Word had gotten around. Not about Briar. His name never made it past the pasture. But about something that didn't fit right. A hunter found mauled. More whispers. A survey map leaked showing plans to clear-cut new trails near the western tree line. Folks with money sniffing around, wanting to turn wild land into guided hunts and rental cabins. The kind with porches too clean and tourists too loud. They called it development. They called it opportunity. But folks who had lived here long enough knew the truth. It was always the quiet that got cleared first. Marae sat near the back of the hall, bundled in a worn canvas coat, a knit hat pulled low. Her breath was still short some mornings, but steadier. Not perfect, but stronger. The scars hadn't left her lungs, but Briar's rhythm hadn't left her memory either. She kept one hand resting over her chest without thinking. Hank sat beside her, arms folded, legs planted wide. His eyes stayed forward, jaw tight. Not angry, just ready. The building was packed. Old folks from the South Ridge, ranchers, loggers, Agnes Bellamy with her stubborn cane. 2 reporters from Boise pretending to be locals. At the front, a folding table with name tags too clean for this town. One of them, a man with hair slicked too flat, started the meeting with his sleeves rolled and tie loose like that made him friendly. "We're here tonight," he said, "because we believe salmon's future is bigger than what's been holding it back." People shifted. Chairs creaked. Somewhere near the side, a mutter rose. He kept going. "This region has untapped value, untapped visibility. People want wilderness, but they want it safe, controlled, with access." More mutters, louder this time. Cal Reddick stood from his corner and cleared his throat. His badge caught the light for a second before he stepped forward. "I've seen the map," he said, "and I've seen the numbers. You're talking about clearing 400 acres of mixed forest and reclassifying the edge zones as non-protected." "That's correct," the man said, still smiling. "It's just brush and hazard zones. No critical ecosystems will be compromised. That brush," Cal said slowly, "is home to elk, to bear, to things we don't have names for yet." A silence. Then someone laughed, short, nervous. The man's smile didn't fade. "I understand there's been talk, myths, but we're not here to entertain legends." At that, Voss stood. She hadn't come to speak. That much was clear from her coat still buttoned, her gloves still on. But she did. "I've treated wounds on creatures no one can explain," she said quietly. "I've watched something learn to calm a child with sound alone." People turned, eyebrows lifted. Agnes made a noise that might have been approval. The man up front blinked. "I'm sorry, are you?" "I'm the doctor who stitched that creature back together," she said. "He didn't attack anyone. He didn't threaten anyone. He saved that girl's life more than once." Her eyes moved to Marae. Just for a second. "And he bled for it." The room swelled with breath held too long. Then Agnes stood, not fast, but deliberate. Her voice wobbled but didn't break. "I've lived here 83 years, she said. "I've seen things that don't belong on paper. I've heard them. I've felt them." Her eyes flashed hard at the man with the tie. "Don't mistake our silence for stupidity." The tension snapped like dry wood. The investor shifted, laughed once. "Folks, I understand emotions are high, but let's remember the facts." And then it happened. A sound. Not loud, not from a speaker. From outside. A low vibration, long and low. The kind that didn't echo so much as settle. A hum. People turned toward the windows. There, just beyond the glass doors at the back of the hall, standing beneath the overhang where the wind couldn't quite reach, was a figure. Massive. Still, not threatening. North. He didn't move, didn't step forward. Just stood in the snowfall, shoulders broad, chest rising slow. That human-like wild man, face visible even in shadow. Amber eyes steady, beard thick and damp with frost. And then he hummed, just once. It rolled through the building without shaking a single wall. Inside, the old ones went still. The younger ones stopped breathing. The man with the tie didn't speak again. Cal stepped forward, voice low. "I suggest we take a pause on the expansion." No one argued. The mayor, red-faced and confused, banged the gavel once. "We'll form a committee to reassess. Immediate hold on permits. Motion carried." People didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They sat with the weight of what they'd seen pressing into their ribs like something too holy to name. When the doors opened again, North was gone. Only his shape remained in the snow, like a memory that hadn't melted yet. Outside, the wind didn't howl. It just moved, soft through the pines. At the back of the room, Marae sat still, her hand still on her chest. Hank mirrored her, and for the first time it wasn't out of fear or protection, it was respect. When the chairs scraped and people stood, no one spoke too loud. No one mocked. They walked out like leaving church. Cal followed last, his fingers brushing the window frame as if checking it was all real. And Agnes, before leaving, turned once more toward the open space where North had stood. She nodded, then stepped into the snow. The night didn't feel quite as cold, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Not while the woods still watched. Not while the rhythm still lingered beneath the noise. By the time the snow melted into the soft ruts along Meadow Creek, the air had changed again. It wasn't just the season lifting off the land like steam from a mug left too long on the porch rail. It was the way light returned. Not all at once, just brighter each morning. The kind of brightness that made you breathe a little deeper, even if you didn't mean to. It slid through the slats of the barn, warmed the tin roof on the east side first, and melted the frost off the windowsill of the little stall before breakfast. The sign went up quietly, one nail at a time. Hank carved it by hand, took his time sanding the corners smooth. Didn't say much while he did it. Just sat under the porch overhang with a block plane and a thermos of coffee, shaping each letter with more care than any word he'd spoken in a long time. Marae stood beside him when he drove the last nail into the top rail of the fence, just outside the old goat shed. The same stall where a fevered creature had once hummed the breath back into her chest. The sign read, Haven at Meadow Creek. No explanation. No business hours. Just a name. People started showing up a few weeks later. Not in crowds, not strangers with cameras. Just the ones who already lived a little quieter. Kids who startled easy. Folks who hadn't slept right in months. A woman from Chalice who had stopped speaking after her husband died in the fire 2 years back. A boy who flinched every time his own name was called. They came and stayed for a while. Sometimes just an afternoon. Sometimes overnight. Marae let them brush the old mare or sit with the goats. She showed them how to listen for stillness. How to stand barefoot in the straw until your breath matched the earth's again. Nobody asked questions. They didn't need to. Dr. Voss came by some weekends, sat cross-legged on the back stoop, telling slow stories about things that weren't quite animals and weren't quite ghosts either. She didn't say the word Bigfoot, but she told the truth in a way that stuck. She talked about how some things in this world don't speak like we do, but that doesn't mean they're silent. Sometimes what they offer is rhythm. Sometimes what they carry is mercy. Marae took notes, not with the intensity of a student, but like someone gathering pieces of something they'd already lived. Her journal filled slowly. Pages of drawings, tiny observations, a pattern in the way birds scattered before dusk, the curve of hoof prints beside bare ones too wide for any man. The outline of a handprint in mud left where no human had walked in days. Every few mornings, she left offerings at the tree line. Not food, not traps, just things Briar might recognize. A cedar sprig, a rock with a line scratched into it, a length of dried grass tied the way he used to. No one told her what to do. She just knew. Hank built a bench out front. Rough wood, no varnish. The kind that lasts because no one ever asks it to be anything fancy. He'd sit there some evenings with his elbows on his knees, watching the far hills. Didn't always say why, but his eyes tracked the tree line like it was something alive. And maybe it was. One morning, just as the fog lifted off the creek and the rooster hadn't yet bothered to crow, Marae saw them. 3 of them, silhouettes in the distance. Tall, still. Just on the edge of the trees where the new growth tangled with old cedar trunks. She didn't move. One stepped forward. Briar, she knew before he turned. Bigger now. Broader. Standing taller in the shoulders. But his gait was the same. The way he held his arms slightly forward, gentle and slow, like someone who'd learned to be careful without being afraid. Beside him, 2 smaller figures. Not quite his height. Younger. new to this rhythm. They stood in silence for a long time. Briar didn't step into the field. He didn't have to. Marae did something without meaning to. Something so old and simple it felt like muscle memory. She raised her hand to her chest and waited. He did the same. A hum left him, barely audible, like the wind inside a shell. Short, kind, a greeting without a promise. Then they turned, melted back into the timber like smoke sliding behind bark. But it didn't feel like an ending. Not this time. Later that day, Hank lit the oil lamp in the stall even though the sun was still out. Said it kept the place warm. Cal dropped off a sack of coffee and a note scrawled in block print. Trail north is still clear. No recent sign of logging crews. Agnes hung a brass bell on the porch. Said it had belonged to her sister's old mule, and no soul had rung it in 20 years. She didn't want it rung, just wanted it there, so the wind could touch it when it felt like it. That night, Marae sat on the back step and opened her notebook. She wrote only one sentence. Freedom isn't leaving, it's being remembered. Then she closed it, leaned back, and watched the stars come up one by one, slow as breath in a quiet chest. Far off beyond the pasture, at the rim where forest and memory blended into one, a flicker of amber eyes caught the last light. They didn't linger, just turned once, then were gone. And the wind, brushing through the pines, carried one last note. Not a cry, not a warning, not even a song, just a hum so faint it barely existed, because there was no fear left to calm, only peace between worlds that no longer needed to hide from each other. Sometimes, the quietest stories leave the deepest echoes, not because they shout, but because they listen, because they wait, because they remind us that not everything sacred needs to be understood to be honored, and not everything different needs to be feared to be respected. Out there, beyond the fences we build and the lines we draw on maps, there are rhythms older than our names. They hum through the trees, curl beneath the riverbeds, and breathe beneath our silence. And every so often they reach toward us, not to be tamed, but to be witnessed, to remind us that kindness is a language, and sometimes mercy is simply being willing to stay, to hold a hand out when instinct tells you to run, to stay soft in a world that keeps asking you to harden. This was never a story about monsters. It was a story about breath, about stillness, about what happens when we choose compassion over fear and presence over control, about how the ones we're taught to see as dangerous are sometimes just trying to survive, sometimes just trying to return home, and sometimes, when the walls fall quiet enough, they leave something behind, not a warning, not a myth, but a memory that hums like a lullaby in the bones of the land. Maybe we don't need to understand everything to love it. Maybe wonder is a kind of faith, and maybe the wild doesn't need our approval, just our respect. Thank you for walking this path with us. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice helps keep stories like this alive, and your presence means more than you know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes in quiet magic. Because sometimes what you hear in the silence might be exactly what someone else is waiting for.